Washington State has many registered military voters living domestically and overseas. In a state where elections are conducted exclusively through vote by mail, nearly 50,000 ballots traveled around the globe last year to reach military voters. The Secretary of State's office and its elections division are responsible for overseeing this process and are committed to ensuring that all military members receive their ballots in time.
Military and overseas voters are very near and dear to my heart because I was one once. My husband was with the U.S. Army and we were stationed in Germany in the late 80s. And we had a very defining experience in an election when the ballot didn't get to us in time. Los Angeles County couldn't get it physically to us before Election Day and we weren't able to vote in an election. It just reinforces for me how important it is for our office to ensure that every single person that wants to participate in the act of voting has that opportunity.
Military voters represent one of the most challenging and unique demographics to serve. One of the major obstacles is sending ballots to people who are in remote locations around the world. There are many parts of the world that don't have reliable postal services. Getting ballots to these voters and getting those ballots back in time to be counted has historically been a problem. Another challenge facing our military and overseas voters is that they move frequently.
In a move, you have a lot to worry about. You have to get your household goods shipped to your next duty station. You need to make sure that all your creditors know your new address and make sure your mail catches up with you. And for most voters, the last thing on their mind is remembering to update their voter registration record with, where they're living currently.
Patrick McDonald has worked as the Secretary of State's Special Assistant for both Sam Reed and Kim Wyman. As a member of the military for over 20 years, with 5 major deployments, Patrick knows firsthand the difficulties of casting a ballot overseas, facing challenges in 2 elections.
For both elections, my ballot didn't arrive until the day before the election. And so because of that, I ended up pulling a ballot off the internet from Thurston County. And the county auditor at the time, who is now the Secretary of State, was nice enough to even email me one. But in the end, the ballot did arrive. It arrived the day before, but it did arrive. And I always took the ballot out to some significant place, be it the ruins of Sarajevo or a fallen Saddam statue in Iraq, and voted. I think it was important to do that.
Several key pieces of legislation have helped aid efforts to facilitate voting for military and overseas voters.
Washington State has changed its election dates twice over the last couple of years to facilitate the voting for military and overseas voters. The first time was in 2006. And that was pursuant to recommendations from the Department of Defense that all states should provide about 45 days of transit time for ballots to be sent to military and overseas voters and be returned.
I would say the most important step we took was actually moving the primary back. We had one of the latest primaries in the country. It was in September, and we just had problems because particularly if there was, say, a recount and after the primary, the clock just ran out in terms of being able to get those ballots out really early. So I proposed, and my predecessor, Ralph Monroe, proposed that we move it back. And we finally succeeded, and frankly, partly because of the MOVE Act.
Congress passed legislation called the MOVE Act, which is short for Military and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act. And that legislation set a couple of requirements. One of them was to require that 45 days of transit time be prior to Election Day. So Washington was providing 45 days of transit time, but we are providing some of that time before Election Day and some of that time after Election Day. The MOVE Act required that the 45-day minimum be before Election Day only.
One of the provisions that the United States Congress passed at the request of the U.S. Department of Defense was that ballots be emailed to military and overseas citizens. That was an initiative taken by the manager of elections of Thurston County in the late 90s, Kim Wyman, who's of course now Secretary of State. She came to me and said, I think we could work our way around this problem of having such a late primary by emailing ballots. They still had to mail the ballots back, though we had actually accepted, say a fax coming back and hold on to it until the paper ballot arrived. We were the first in the nation to do this, And we were so successful at it that when I became Secretary of State, got it passed here in the state of Washington, and then they emulated us back in the United States Congress by including it in their legislation.
Building upon these successes, Washington State is now one of the few states that allows military and overseas voters to not only access their ballots online, but also to return their ballots electronically through email or fax.
It's those kinds of innovations and that commitment that our state has to making sure that every single voter gets a chance to vote that I really think has moved Washington to the forefront of serving our military and overseas voters.
In honor of his innovations and achievements, former Secretary Reed received an award from the Department of Defense for his work in assisting military voters. He was the only Secretary of State in the entire country to be recognized with this prestigious award.
I'm proud of it because our elections section in the Secretary of State's office and the county auditors in this state have made extraordinary efforts to serve military and overseas citizens. We've always made a real effort to get out to all the bases in the state, Air Force, Navy, Army, as well as for the National Guard.
At the request of the Secretary of State's office, the Washington State Legislature passed legislation that allows voters to indicate whether they are a military or overseas voter when they register to vote.
From our perspective as election administrators, we highly recommend that military voters indicate from the very beginning that they are a military voter on their voter registration. That way, anyone who is sending them a ballot or a voter's pamphlet knows that those voters may need that material a little earlier. And the Federal MOVE Act does allow for us to send military voters voting materials up to 45 days before an election. So when military voters tell us that they are a military voter on their voter registration, we keep it in the database and we know automatically that they should be receiving those materials early and that they may be eligible for special services.
The Secretary of State's Elections Division highly recommends visiting myvote.wa.gov. The site offers a personalized elections toolkit for voters.
What we want military voters to use MyVote for is to look up their voter registration, to maintain their voter registration, whether that means changing their mailing address as they move around based on where they're serving, or to look up their current elected officials and find out who they can contact to have a bigger influence on what's happening here in Olympia and nationally.
If I had to impress one thing on you is your connection to your community back home, and one of the most important ways you can do that is by participating in the elections process. Being connected, voting for your local elected officials, voting for those statewide office holders who represent you. It is one thing to be out of state for many years, but when you return, if you've been voting and participating, you're going to be connected when you get home, and those representatives are going to actually represent you. So I encourage you to be part of that process. Make sure that your information is updated. Make sure you're registered to vote, and vote that ballot when it gets sent to you. And be connected, because you are so important to not only our local community here in Washington State, you're important to your community back home, and you're serving our country in a very important way, and we want to make sure that you're connected to it in the most fundamental way by voting. Thank you.
For more information on deadlines, registering to vote, or updating your voter registration information, sending and receiving your ballot, and being a more informed voter, visit our website at vote.wa.gov.